Hey, if you love the Mental Health Warriors podcast, share it. That's an order. Share it. Or you can support us on, and you can support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/mentalhealthwarriors. I'm going to leave that in to show you that this is a raw show. It's full of authenticity, which means you get to listen to all my mistakes. So this podcast episode is with Cam Adair, and we talk about video game addiction, which is actually not something that I had really given much thought to before we got connected and had this conversation. And it's super, super interesting. So Cam suffered from a really serious video gaming addiction that led ultimately to a suicide attempt. And he's overcome it, and he's really created something truly remarkable. An online community of 50,000 people. He's done TED Talks. He's been all over the media, travels the world talking, and, he's helped thousands of people. So I think, especially, after Christmas, I'm sure many kids have gotten tons of video games, technology, all those things, and are probably still on school vacation at the time of releasing this podcast and probably still have their noses buried in them. But I really think you should listen to this, whether you are a person who thinks that you might have an issue with gaming, or a parent who suspects your kid might have an issue with gaming, because Cam has some incredible advice, but also like some guidance, step-by-step guidance about what to do. And we talk a lot about self-awareness and those kind of things that I'm really passionate about. And it was interesting to hear how that kind of stuff, those kind of concepts are applied in the context of video gaming. So thanks, Cam. Thanks for what you're doing. All the Cam's bio and everything is in the show notes page. He's an impressive dude. And he really, really made me want to learn to surf. It's something I've been thinking about. And unfortunately, I live nowhere near anywhere where it's possible to surf. But the next time I'm near an ocean that has surfing waves, I'm taking lessons. That's it. I've drawn a line in the sand. You can hold me accountable. Please do. I will become the world's most average surfer sometime before my 46th birthday. And that's the bottom line. So listen, enjoy this episode. And thanks for the great conversation, Cam. I hope you enjoy it.
Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are mental health warriors, and this is our voice.
Hey, Cam, welcome to the Mental Health Warriors podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So recently you were named as one of Canada's 150 difference makers in mental health. So congratulations on that. And a friend of mine, Rebecca Gibson, was also named as one of those people. So I was actually in Toronto just having breakfast with her the day of the award. So did you travel up to attend that ceremony?
So there were a few different ceremonies, Vancouver, Calgary, I think Toronto, somewhere else. And so I did travel up for the Calgary one, which was really special just to kind of be there with my family. And the award for me was a lot more of a recognition of my parents and what they've done to be able to help me get to where I am today. And just being able to share that moment and that night with them was really special.
Yeah, I bet it was. So why were you named as one of the top 150 difference makers in mental health?
I would like to say it's because I'm just incredibly charming and good looking, but it probably has a little bit more to do with the fact that, game quitters and just the work that we're doing around video game addiction is being recognized. And I think that that's really important with Game Quitters itself, which just for anyone listening, it's gamequitters.com. It's the largest support community for video game addiction. And that whole movement and community is not really about me. But I also recognize the importance of having a face to an issue, or having someone out there on the front lines willing to do the media and the interviews and kind of to make some noise. And when you have that sort of face, it allows other people to really be able to be anchored into the movement. So yeah, I think that although I'm recognized maybe with my name, it's really a recognition of the entire movement and the entire community.
It's amazing. So game quitters. So you mentioned video gaming addiction. I mean, how do you describe, before we get at your backstory, which I'm sure is super interesting, how do you describe video game addiction? Just so we all have a shared understanding of the issue.
Yeah, so it's an interesting moment for us because it was just officially recognized as gaming disorder by the World Health Organization in the ICD-11 coming out next year. And for them and the American Psychiatric Association in the DSM, who's also looking at it, ultimately, they're going to have a certain criteria, just like any other addiction, where, you have to meet 5 out of the 11 criteria in the last 12 months to be diagnosed. For me personally, I like to keep things a little bit more simple. So where I begin is gaming having a negative impact in your life? And if it is, okay, that's fine. Let's talk about it. Are you finding yourself needing more and more and more? That's tolerance. Are you finding yourself thinking about games all day long when you're at work and you're just counting down the hours until you can go and play? That's preoccupation. Have you tried to quit and you failed, you relapsed? Have you tried to limit your time and that's not worked out either? Are you deceiving people around you to continue to play more and more and more? Those are some criteria you can look at. But for me, it really comes down to, is it serving you? Is it serving your life? And if it's not, okay, that's fine. We can have compassion for it, but we can also recognize, how can we support you, or how can you support yourself in being able to live a great life? And sometimes that involves letting go of habits that no longer serve you.
So I've never really, I've struggled with it. It's interesting. I've struggled with addiction myself. And so I understand the thought pattern or the feeling, I guess, of being somewhat helpless, or not in control of the decisions I was making. And I learned to get in control of those, but I understand that feeling of helplessness can be overwhelming and create a lot of despair. Are there specific genres of video games that are more likely to trigger a video game addiction? Or is it basically just video games in general?
Everyone's a little bit different, but what we know from the research that we've done is that games that tend to be more social, online multiplayer games, those tend to just be played more by video game addicts. And that makes sense, right? Because these games are never ending. They also have the social component, and it's like you're living in a different world. So those sorts of games we see a lot of our audience tend to play. But we also have a lot of people who are in our community now who, played single player games. So it can be wide ranging, but I think that the most important thing is why you're playing the games. And, the type of game that you're playing can give you a lot of insight into yourself and into your motivations and into what you're drawn towards. And so if you're trying to help someone who maybe is a video game addict in your life, paying attention to the types of games that they play is super beneficial, because if they're playing first-person shooter games, they like to be the character. They like to be in the moment. They like to be in that flow state. So things like sports and other activities where they get that sort of flow state can be really beneficial. I played a lot of those games, and now I love surfing. That's not a surprise to me. Whereas if someone's playing more role-playing games, they like to create a character and kind of create a narrative. And so things like storytelling or filmmaking could be really great for them. So it's more using the type of game as insightful information. But video game addicts tend to play games because they want to escape and they want to socially connect. They want to see growth and progress, and they want it all through instant gratification. And they want to feel a structured degree of certainty of, when I turn this game on and I play it, I know what's going to happen, or I know what I need to do. Whereas in real life, that's a lot harder to find.
So when you say instant gratification, how does that balance? I guess, where does the instant gratification come in versus the level of commitment it must take to develop mastery over some of these games. I know for myself, I've never been much of a gamer, but I know when I try to play a first-person shooter game, if I'm playing with a friend who's skilled, for example, I'm running around with a knife and they're calling in airstrikes on my from some unseen chopper on my head. So, how does the instant gratification? I'm not sure the best way to word this, but balance with the commitment and the time required to develop a level of mastery over the game itself?
It's a really great question. And I think that games warp your perspective or the paradigm that you live in around how your effort creates rewards and that sort of feedback loop. And so there's actually a quote by one of our members that I think just illustrates this really, really, really well. And he says that this was directed towards advice that a gaming addict would have for a therapist. And he says, a non-gamer therapist may struggle to understand just how thoroughly games can supplant one's understanding of value, work, and effort in the real world. Games are extremely explicit in their expectations and consistent in their rewards. Real life is murkier. Actions and outcomes often have no linear relationship. To a gamer, this inconsistency can be extremely demotivating. Getting your life back on track doesn't have an XP bar. And so I think when we're looking at that, ultimately what he's saying is that games are very consistent in their expectations and rewards. So although games take a lot of time to become a master of, the consistency and the structured way that games are create this new paradigm you live in where if you put in effort, you improve. And real life, although that is technically true, right? If you put in effort, you do get better. Sometimes it's a bit more, it's not as linear as games tend to be.
Oh, I never thought about that. So does that mean that, like, based on your experience with the people in your community, do games, keeping that in mind, I guess, do games in general and maybe, the addictive part of it, are there a certain type of people that are more interested in gaming and then to follow that more susceptible to becoming addicted?
What we see in the research that we've done is that young men in their early 20s tend to be the most at risk. And when I say at risk, what I would say is young men in their early 20s are the ones who make up the biggest demographic of our community. And that's not because they haven't been struggling before. In fact, the cycle, I believe, starts when, you get an iPad at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. Gaming becomes the dominant kind of main activity that It's how you fulfill all of your emotional needs. You can use it to escape, to socially connect, to see measurable progress, and to feel a sense of purpose. In high school, you're able to get away with it because high school is not that hard. You have supervision. You have parents kind of watching you. But then you get to college. Now, college, you have less supervision, harder classwork, more social things going on. You have to be more independent. And all of that equals more stress. And the way that you deal with stress is you game. And then that gets you behind in school, which equals more stress, which equals more gaming. And that's where the spiral happens. And maybe at first you get behind in class, then maybe you fail a test, then maybe you fail out of school altogether. And so what we see a lot is that sort of person. Or the other person is someone who, has managed to maybe get through high school, get through college, and, maybe now they have a family, but they're just going to work, coming home and gaming, and they're not really present at home, not really present with their kids. And they're starting to see the negative impact of it's affecting their marriage. It's affecting their relationships with their kids. And that's really where, we see a lot of men in their 30s who are on the verge of divorce and they're trying to get their life back in order.
The point you make about kids, I think, is really important because I had a guy on the podcast. His name's Kim John Payne, and his body of work is around simplicity parenting and really, giving your kids much more unstructured time. Really limiting technology. And we actually sent our kids to a school It's a Waldorf school. My daughter's in high school now. But anyways, the point is there was no technology in the school, and they didn't have devices for quite a long time. And what I see, though, is I see some other people I know, and I'm sure this is very common, from the moment their kids wake up, bam, they're on the iPad. And it's, for me, as someone who's not used to that, they come and visit, they might come and visit and stay over. And to have a 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid on an iPad with this game screaming at him, like this very simple, but it's a first-person shooter game screaming at him, is really jarring for me because I'm not used to it. But I wonder, like, what impact, what long-term, impact can it have on that kid? And obviously one of them is just a constantly being overstimulated, but I hadn't really thought about it from the perspective of, learning to meet their emotional needs through that medium at such a young age. So as time goes on and technology becomes more pervasive and it gets in the hands of younger people, like how much of that are you seeing where it's becoming more of a problem because of when it started in people's lives?
Absolutely. It's a huge part of it. And the truth is that we don't even know what that negative impact is going to be long term because we haven't had enough years yet of giving kids who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old iPads in order for us to see what the negative impact of that is in 15 years. Right. And that's a scary thing because what I know is there was a study done by Cam Adair out of Ontario, Canada, that found 13% of students between grades 7 and 12 report symptoms of a video game problem. And that was a 4% increase over the previous 5 years, And we know from the research that we've done that the average gamer or gaming addict in our community started gaming at 8 years old. And at 8 years old, if you start at 7 or 6, 5, any of those earlier ages, the compounding negative impact of that is extremely significant. So I was just in Australia and I met some extended family, and my cousin's son is 5 years old, and he's the only kid in the neighborhood who doesn't have an iPad. And there's all this pressure from other parents saying, like, oh, you're not going to get him an iPad, but like our son is playing these games and loves them and all this stuff. And what's so messed up about it is that the parents are being genuine in being excited about their kids being able to swipe left and swipe right. And wow, my kid is such a genius. And the parents are also genuine in the fact that they're overwhelmed from the day. They went to work and have to come home and cook, and their kid needs attention. And the iPad's a very effective babysitter. And at the same time, you have these tech companies marketing these products and these devices as the next most important thing for education, which is very deceptive because really the purpose of that is to sell more of them. Mm-hmm. It's not because they're necessarily being super genuine about whether or not those devices are really that effective. And whenever the conversation comes around, it's always, well, they're shown to increase your hand-eye coordination. And it's like, yeah, but at what cost? Because you could have the best hand-eye coordination in the world, but if you can no longer sit in a room by yourself without literally freaking out, or if someone takes that device away from you and you start throwing things across the room, I don't really care what your hand-eye coordination is, because you can't even be with yourself. You can't be an independent person. So I think that there's a lot more to the conversation than we're really acknowledging. And we don't know what the long-term impact is. But what I've seen is people who come into our community who are 20, 21, 22, 23, and have never had any other hobbies. And so when they go to quit gaming, they're like, well, I want to quit, but I don't know what else I would do with my time. Or I want to quit, but quitting means I'm going to lose all of my friends, and I don't want to lose all of my friends. And I don't know how to make new friends. And that, especially when it comes to who they are as an identity, I think is so much more of the conversation. And just most people aren't acknowledging it because it's just easier to focus on, what the tech companies are telling you. Yeah,
I agree. And I think one thing that you mentioned that I totally agree with and I think is important is that parents do, for the most part, believe they're doing right by their kids. I think part of what there's also a fear of, if I don't get technology into the hands of my kids at a young age, they're somehow going to fall behind, and I look at my own experience where we kept technology out of the hands of our kids for a long, long time. And even now we have pretty strict rules about it, but they're kids. If you teach them values and ethics and how to interact with other human beings and all of the foundational stuff, you can give them a device when they're 12 years old and they will have it figured out in about, an hour. So, I mean, it's the idea that they're falling behind is, to me, not the right concern to have. It's more, how do I set these kids up with the foundation to be able to interact with people, make better decisions, know when I'm living to my values and all of those things. If we spent more time as parents investing that type of effort into our kids, a lot of these problems, I think, would go away.
Exactly. And that touches on a really crucial point, which is the social pressure as a parent from other parents, or the vulnerability and shame as a parent, is so important to recognize. Because if you have a gaming addict as a son, you're not really going to be telling other parents about it, because on some level that reflects on you as a parent. Or when your kid is the only one who is not using an iPad, how does that reflect on you as a parent, right? And so there's so much more social pressure from other parents or from yourself as a parent that you're going to be the one who messes up your kid. Mm-hmm. And that's contributing to so much problematic use of technology, when really, when you get down to it, understanding your values and ethics and really who you want to raise your kids to be, when you get back to that, that allows you to really remember like what the whole point of all of this is. But I know that the social pressure for parents is huge, and that comes in many forms, whether it's parents don't show up to parent nights around healthy technology use, or they don't tell other parents that they're struggling and, any advice, or they're like, oh, we're the only house without an iPad. Like, we need to get an iPad so we fit in. And we always need to come back to like, who are we really trying to raise and who are we really trying to impress? And how do we want to live our lives? And we can always take information in from other people and, explore different things. But we need to remember that it's our life and it's our values. And we always need to come back to that and decide how we want to live for ourselves.
I think, I would imagine too, many parents are sending mixed messages, right? You can't teach your kids how to be fully present, for example, or how to use technology in a way that's appropriate and balanced when you yourself as a parent are constantly on your phone, checking Facebook, sending texts, the kids, whatever the subject is. But when kids see a misalignment between your words and your deeds, that's like chum to a great white shark, man. They'll just feed on that stuff, right? So the same thing applies to technology use. So we gotta, as parents, and we need to model the example, and not, we don't have to be perfect. It's not that, but I think for me too, it's creating an environment in our own home where my kids can call me on my bullshit, right? If I'm not, my 14 and 13-year-old have no problem whatsoever doing that. If I am not, living to my values that I've told them that I hold dear to me. So yeah, anyways, I kind of went on a little monologue there, but, so how about, one thing that in my own personal journey, with my wife's mental health issue and suicide and even my own addiction, what I found really surprising for me was I could never have imagined how bad things could get. Like, my wife was on the extreme end of the, say, emotional dysregulation scale. So I saw, sort of manic behavior, I could never have imagined somebody behaving that way for that long a period of time. And on the flip side of that, I saw absolutely soul-crushing depression. And before I witnessed that, I never could have imagined something could be so bad. I just, how would I have been able to understand that? So one of the things that I like to tell people about is that, right? Is that here's what it can, on a day-to-day basis, here's what it actually looks like, because I don't want people walking around like I was with the belief that, depression, it's weakness, man. It's just really a matter of willpower and you got to suck it up. I mean, until my wife went through her illness, that's what I believed. And it's something entirely different than that. So when it comes to gaming, like, obviously there's a huge spectrum, but what are some of the more, I guess, what are some of the extreme cases or behaviors that you can see from people so people understand just how dangerous this can be and how serious it can get?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, we see such a wide range of the spectrum. So, I see everything from kids as young as 10 years old all the way up to, seniors who are 70. And, in my personal story, I got to a point where I wrote a suicide note. And that was the night where I knew I needed to make a change. We see a lot of that. One of the most difficult days of last year for me, I was in Tanzania, and we have a forum where people journal and kind of open up and share their experience. And there was a 17-year-old member of our community from the UK who has been around our community for a long time. He's had some amazing progress, and he's also with mental health. Sometimes there's ups, sometimes there's downs, and just like my life, as much as people, if they follow me online, can see that, on some level, I'm really living a great life. I mean, I was just in Australia for 6 weeks, traveling around, surfing, having a great time. I also go through some real dark periods too. And last year was no exception. So there was a 17-year-old member of our community who was journaling about how he was depressed and really feeling suicidal. And I was sitting in Tanzania one day reading his journal about how his parents had left the house, and he had got to a point where he actually Googled how to tie a noose and did it, and was standing on the edge of a chair with a noose around his neck, asking himself if he was going to have the courage to actually do it. We see that. We see people losing their families, losing their kids, so much of that. A lot of violence where parents will take, the Xbox away and the kid will start throwing things around the house and getting super violent. Cops have to be called. So, that's like on the more extreme side. But I think the relatable part for most people is a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of just being checked out generally from society, a lot of apathy. Who cares? Life is meaningless. Why can't I just play video games and like just wait till I die? Mm-hmm. That sort of mentality. Just general, like, not being able to actually communicate. A lot of parents will say that, they're trying to talk to their kid and it's like talking to a brick wall. So just no ability for true connection. And most importantly, and this is, something valuable, I hope for people listening, is the question that I like to ask is, am I happy or am I just having fun? And with games, at least, I was very stimulated. I was very entertained, but I wasn't fulfilled. I was having fun, but I wasn't happy. And really understanding that, at least in my life, my purpose of my life is to be happy. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from my values. And one of my top values is contribution and service. I find that very fulfilling. And so having fun is great. I can go get drunk and have a lot of fun, but the next day I'm miserable. And how could I have that level of fun without having the hangover the next day, or I'm miserable, right? Or more anxious. And that's really the zone I try to find. Where is my highest excitement? Where is my flow state? And things like surfing and DJing and travel and hiking and things like that, at least for me, those have really helped a lot. So I think it's easy to focus on the extremes, and those are important for people to understand. But I think the most dangerous is not so much the extreme side of the spectrum, but the just general apathy and just complete paralysis of like, who cares? Life sucks anyways. And that sort of mentality can creep in without people really recognizing it. And next thing you know, it's not been just a year, 2 years, 3 years. It's been a decade or multiple decades where you've still been doing the same thing and you've never truly tried to achieve the things in your life that you feel inspired to achieve. And I think that's what we know from research shows at the end of your life that you'll regret.
How do you explain, maybe I'll preface this question. So when I was sort of in the grips of my addiction to alcohol, I didn't really know, like I was happy, I guess you could say. Like, I mean, I wasn't miserable, but the way I felt was absolutely nothing compared to the way I feel now. And it's taken me a number of years to get to this point, a lot of personal development, a lot of conversations like this, and a lot of vulnerability, a lot of being really open about what I went through and even still like what I go through today and what I struggle with. But the concept of like, if somebody had told me that I could be this happy, it would have been such an abstract concept that I wouldn't have been able to relate to it. And I don't think it would have had much impact on me in that moment. So when you're talking to people in your community, or maybe even for parents talking to kids, what are some, I guess, tools or strategies or ways that you can talk to them about this concept that might seem completely foreign to them?
Yeah, I think that ultimately it's really coming down to helping them have a different experience of life, because once you've experienced something, you can't unexperience it. So, initially at least getting going by, exercising a lot, more like high intensity training where you get a sweat going and you really just shift the energy in your body. Hiking, I think reconnecting with nature really allows you to kind of just feel a different vibe of the world that is completely different than sitting in a dark room, isolated, staring in front of a screen. And, personally, like I just went hiking through Joshua Tree on Friday, and I almost feel like I'm craving that again because just like being in nature and the air and just the impact that all has on your physical energy, that then translates to your mental energy. So we know that, most gaming addicts have been basically gaming addicts most of their life, and they've never actually experienced what life is like without it. So what we recommend is to take a 90-day detox. That's 90 days cold turkey off gaming. And after 90 days, they're allowed to reevaluate what their relationship is like to gaming. So maybe that means that they go back and try moderation. Maybe they decide to continue not to play at all. Maybe they try moderation and completely fail and then realize they really need to quit for good. But the reason why I think that's so important is because they've never had an experience of what life is like without gaming. And so for them to quit is for them to make this decision to step into the unknown. And we know that part of the reason they're not doing that is because they like the structured certainty of games. But being able to create that different reference point, that contrast to their current life, helps them so much to be able to make that new decision. So I think for anyone, whether it's around addiction or it's around just feeling happy, being able to create more contrast points where then you're able to evaluate, like when I was sitting in my room all day, I felt really groggy and kind of like a zombie after playing games for 10 hours. Whereas when I went hiking, at the end I was tired, but I felt amazing, right? And really allowing yourself to feel that. Or, today I'll go surfing, and after I surf, like I notice how my brain feels after I go surfing, where I just feel this like state of bliss in my eyes. But it took me going surfing to start to realize that. So I think it's all about learning through contrast. And the easiest way to do that at the beginning, when you might not necessarily know what some of those things are you want to do, is just to try a lot of different things. Go do karaoke, go do a new sport, try boxing, try yoga, try hiking, go take a salsa class. Like, just make it a commitment to go try some new things and see what you like, what you don't like, maybe what you liked about certain things, but didn't like that about certain things. But just go with an honest heart, willing to try and learn more about yourself. Because as you learn more about yourself, that's really where the true value in your life will come from.
I could not agree more. How hard is surfing to learn, by the way?
Oh, so hard. Like,
Is it? I've really been wanting to try it. So
the learning curve on surfing is so gnarly. It's, I've been surfing for like almost 2 years now. And initially, it was like growing up, I always thought surfing, would be, how you do like, what would your perfect day look like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, surfing was kind of like, I would wake up, next to my beautiful wife and, we'd do our thing and then I'd go surfing. And I never lived anywhere where I could actually surf. So when I moved to San Diego, it was like, wow, this is my chance. So I like ordered a surfboard off Amazon, a wetsuit, and was just like, I'm going to go out twice a week and just try and learn. And, I think it took me like a good 3 months before I kind of felt like I had the hang of it. But after that, there's so many other things, like whether it's just getting your strength and conditioning up to be able to paddle and be out there, or learning to position yourself to be able to catch the wave, or, going from like a beginner board, like a long foam board, to a shorter board. That was like a whole learning curve. Or, learning to like duck dive, or learning to go right or to go left or to turn. And, there's so many different elements to it. But what I love about it, and what someone once told me, was the better you get at surfing, the better it gets. And surfing every day is a challenge. Every day something is different. The wave is different. Every day a wave is coming to kill you, and you have to pay attention. And it just teaches you a level of presence that I find beautiful. And it's the best meditation I personally have found. It's a lot harder for me to sit down in silence. But if I'm moving around, like hiking or surfing, I'm really able to get really present and quiet with myself. And so find what works for you. But surfing for me is like a spiritual experience. And I love it because there's always something new to learn. And so I'm never bored with it. And I think that, at least my personality, I can get bored kind of quickly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that appeals to me about it too. But I think there's an interesting relationship between the journey that is mastering surfing and the journey of life, in the sense that when you think about quitting any kind of addiction, but I mean, obviously we're talking about video games, the decision to quit is the beginning of a totally different phase of your journey. Like and I think sometimes, like what happened with me was I stopped drinking, and it is unbelievable to me to think back at 41 years old, how little self-awareness I had about who I was and what I loved and how I wanted to make a contribution. So I stopped drinking, and I spent this period where I was, dancing on, like I was on cloud nine, because, oh my God, I quit drinking. I can do anything. And that kept me, very elated for about 3 or 4 months, I would say. And then it really started to sink in, like, wow, I keep telling myself that I can do anything, but I'm doing nothing different. And so that was really a moment where I had to decide, like, what do I want today and tomorrow to look like? So I started, learning about personal development and all that kind of stuff. But it is a lifelong journey. And like you said earlier, it is not linear. So there are great days and there's not so great days. But I think that the decision to quit and to make a change is really just the very, very first step in what can be an amazing journey.
Absolutely. And what you really, a frame or a perspective that seems to help is just acknowledging that you're closing one chapter of your life and you're opening up a new chapter that doesn't include the thing you're moving on from. So, for me, it was closing a chapter of my life where I was a gamer to open up a new chapter of my life where I'm not a gamer. And it doesn't have to be something where it's like, oh, like I wish I could be gaming and trying to hold on, trying to be attached, but just actually, going with the flow of life and knowing that in life, things change. Change is the only constant in life. And the more you can really embrace that and not try to hold on to everything in your life, the more joyful I think you'll experience life to be. And ultimately, it's just not looking back with regret. because when you're looking back with regret, then you want to keep doing the thing just so you don't experience the regret. Whereas you can look back on, something you're moving on from, like gaming, for instance, and say, wow, that was a really beautiful period of my life. I'm really grateful that I got to experience that. Those memories are meaningful, and I built some great relationships and all of that. And I'm also now going to move on because I'm allowed to make that sort of decision for myself. And when you first move on, it's important to know that anytime you're shifting into kind of a new evolution of your life, the more you can add structure to it, the more it's going to create more ease in you being able to follow through. And so a great resource to start with is The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod.
That's what started me, man. That was the very first thing I did on my personal development journey, and it completely changed my life.
Because what happens is when you're entering kind of the unknown, the level of competency that you have with this new life is at its lowest point on day one. But the urgency you have for that level of competence to be perfect on day one is extremely high. And so there's the tension, there's the gap. And so what you can do is you can add structure where it's just a lot easier to follow through. And the best place to start is first thing in the morning. Because if you win the morning, the amount of momentum you'll have for the rest of the day is fantastic. And if you win the morning and the rest of the day isn't great, that's okay too, because tomorrow morning you'll get right back and you'll be having a good morning. And over time, you'll be able to build momentum in a way where, just your day, you start to have more good days instead of bad days. And so The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod is a great resource. I think it's essential for any addict or anyone really looking to improve their mental health. And that's where I would start. Just to add a bit more structure to it where you don't have to think so much, because in those moments where you really have to think about what you're supposed to do or what you should do, those are the moments where they become the hardest, right? And so if you're laying around being like, oh, I'm so bored, and you're staring at the ceiling, oh, I need to do other activities, that's a lot harder than just coming home and diving into an activity because you've already had it scheduled.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the main lessons I took from the book too was I was always, and I still am to a certain extent, but a real cause and effect type of person. So if I take an action, I want to be able to measure, see the result, measure it, and then make a new decision going forward. But what I realized from reading and implementing The Miracle Morning was that my mindset. So if I start the day with wins and feeling good, what I noticed right away, basically on day one, was it changed the way I saw all of the same things that I see every day. So I started interacting with people differently. I was walking in with a more positive frame of mind, and I couldn't believe how this thing I did in the morning was improving a conversation I was having with somebody at noon, because I had I guess just a more positive mindset. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that, wow, the way we see the world and our perspective obviously colors everything. There is no absolute truth, but I have the power to change it. So for me, that was such an awakening moment.
Exactly. And I think that, ultimately all of this comes back to learn more about yourself. Develop a stronger, better relationship with yourself, and you will find life to be far more fun and far more fulfilling.
Yep. So why don't we, usually I do this way before the 40-minute mark, but why don't we rewind and hear actually your backstory? Because I suspect it's very interesting. So why don't you walk us through, I don't know, maybe when your addiction or relationship with technology or gaming started and how it progressed and how you got to the point where you knew it was a huge problem.
Yeah. So, growing up, I was a fairly normal Canadian kid. I went to school, played hockey, and then I'd go home and play video games. And my nickname was Smiley. I was a pretty successful hockey player. Everything was great. But that all changed in the 8th grade when I began to experience a lot of bullying. And the bullying was really intense and caused me to no longer feel very safe at school or on my hockey teams. So I dropped out of high school, not once, but twice, never graduated. And while all my friends were off to college, I was living in my parents' basement playing video games up to 16 hours a day. I was super depressed. And I got to a point where I actually was deceiving my family and pretending to have jobs. So every day my dad would drop me off at a restaurant where I was a prep cook. And as soon as he drove off, I'd walk across the street and catch the bus back home. I'd sneak in through my window and go to sleep. And of course that, after 3 weeks or so, they'd be like, yo, where's the paycheck? So I would like make up some excuse like I quit or I got fired or something happened and get a new job, this time at an internet cafe where technically my job was to just watch other people play video games all night. But of course I wasn't actually working. I was just gaming all night. And so as much as gaming allowed me to escape from dealing with my problems, it didn't actually fix it. So I actually got to a point where my depression got worse and worse and worse. And I eventually wrote a suicide note. And that's the night where I realized I really needed to make a change because I no longer felt safe with myself. I no longer felt like I could prioritize my health and well-being. And I knew that if I wasn't going to end my life, then I had to do the complete opposite, which was to truly try to live it to the fullest. The reason, I guess that night I wrote a suicide note, and then the story is that a couple friends asked me to go see a movie, to go watch the movie Superbad, if you remember that.
I do.
And we got super stoned, like hotboxed a car or something, watched the movie, laughed a lot. And it was kind of like that shift in my state from being like I was just bawling my eyes out, writing a suicide note over dinner, to laughing my face off a couple hours later in a movie. Just made me realize that I needed to ask for help, and that although I was in a lot of pain, I didn't actually want to end my life. So I came home and asked my father to help me find a counselor. He said, of course. I got a counselor, and this counselor did something really genius. And he said that you either have to get and keep a job, or you have to go on antidepressants. Now, for me at the time, I was very motivated to not be on antidepressants. I think it probably just had to do with the fact that I knew myself and knew my addictive personality, and knew that, if I got on those, I was worried about what would happen in the future. And so I got a job at H&M as a prep cook, or not as a prep cook, in the retail store in the kids department. And I just started working, and by working, that gave me some structure, some stability, and some confidence. I was earning money. And ultimately, it kind of came down to, if I wasn't going to end my life, then I had to do the complete opposite and truly try to live it to the fullest. And what that looked like was, if I really put effort into my life, if I really tried to apply my talents to my life, what could happen? How far could I go? What could I really accomplish or make of myself? And at the beginning, I didn't really have any goals. The only goal I knew I wanted was to improve my social skills because of all the bullying I went through. Mm-hmm. So I focused on that. So I actually started going out 7 nights a week, sober. I kept a journal of lessons I was learning, and eventually turned those into a blog, and eventually started a meetup group, eventually launched the business a year later because people started asking me to help them with that. And that existed for about 4 years. And then at the end of that, I took 2 years off to kind of think about what was next. I knew I liked to help people, but I felt like there was something bigger. And eventually it was just so obvious that the work I was doing, because I had written this article on my story of how to quit gaming, that article just kind of blew up and turned into a TEDx talk, which had a really big response. And eventually I just kind of came to a point where I realized that it was a responsibility for me to do something around this issue, and that I was receiving, thousands of messages from people all over the world asking for more information. And all I had was one article and one video, and I should do something more. So we launched gamequitters.com about 3 years ago in January, and it's been a completely crazy ride. It's so we have a YouTube channel with 200 different videos for free. We have a community forum where people can journal and share their experience. We have an online program called Respawn that walks people through step-by-step exactly how to quit. I do a lot of speaking, some research, and now we're supporting 50,000 members a month in 83 countries around the world.
That is incredible. So when you stopped gaming, did you quit cold turkey? And I'm assuming you did, but and what was it like? So you started, you got a job, you started, bettering yourself, living life, but what were the struggles like as a result of quitting? Like how tough was it?
It's a great question. So for me initially, when I quit for 2 years cold turkey. And my entire strategy was that if I'm not gaming, then I can't be at my house. Because if I'm at home, I'm going to be tempted to game. So, I worked like 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'd come home, have a nap, wake up, shower, eat, get dressed, and go out. So I was like just almost never home. And I literally went out 7 nights a week. So the entire strategy was just avoid being in the environment where I could game. Now, that wasn't that hard. And part of it was because I was, again, so clear that I had to make a change, that there was no tension of like, am I doing this or am I not? Now, part of my personality and part of my gift is this sort of all in energy where it's easier for me to be all in than it is for me to kind of be like in moderation. So here's an example. My last roommate I opened the cupboards one day and she had 15 chocolate bars. And I thought that was the craziest idea ever, because she would come home and just have like one bite of one chocolate bar and then rewrap it, put it away, and do it all over again the next day.
That's my wife does that. She'll get a freaking chocolate bar and keep the thing for a month. I don't have those. I don't have that type of strength.
Yeah. The way I would do that is if I had 15 chocolate bars in the cupboard, I would eat as many or all of them as I could until I literally felt sick. And then I would stop, and then I would do that all over again the next day until they were all gone.
And I would hate myself every moment of the process.
I would devour them so quickly. And that's the difference, is that so here's the thing. It's easier for me to just not have those 15 chocolate bars in the house than it is for me to try to pretend that I'm not going to devour them if they are. Whereas for her, she can have 15 chocolate bars in the house and just have a bite, and that's okay. So the lesson for me is don't have 15 chocolate bars in the house. Because if they're not in the house, then for me to like get in my car and go drive and buy one, I'll buy one. I won't buy 15. Right? If I really want one. Or I just won't even think about it because they're not accessible in the house. So I'm like, oh, whatever. Like, I'll just have a banana. Right? So that's the trick for me. But when it came to gaming, it was kind of similar. I just quit 2 years, found some new activities to do, was going out, trying to improve myself, making new friends. And then I relapsed. And when I relapsed, I had started to feel depressed again. And this time I thought I need a change of scenery. I was going to move to Victoria, BC. Get a change of scenery. I need a fresh start. And I moved in with 2 new roommates. One of them, his name was Ben. He was a professional poker player. And he learned that him and I used to play the same game, StarCraft. And he said that, he was going to go out and buy it that night and come home so we could play. And I said, I'm good. Like, I don't really want to play. And he said, I'm going to go buy it. And that night, I'll never forget it. He came home, put the game in front of me and said, just one game. And I said, okay, fine. In that game, he absolutely annihilated me. And my ego took a hit. And I committed that night to doing whatever it took to ensure that he could never beat me like that again. And so that turned into
Quick question. When you decided that, were there red flags going on, in your head saying this is a terrible idea, or did you not have that level of self-awareness?
No, I did not have that level of self-awareness. And part of it too was that I was already feeling kind of depressed. Mm-hmm. So for me, the appeal of being able to just completely escape into something else was very appealing. And I had no self-awareness of like, this is actually a really bad idea. I think my focus on the potential amazingness of being able to play was like far overrided any awareness I had. And so what happened was I ended up gaming 16 hours a day for 5 months straight. Barely left the house. Like I would literally just leave the house to go buy Tim Hortons, come home and game and game and game. And one of the highlights of that entire experience for me was a 3-week period in October when my 2 roommates went back home to visit family and I was at home by myself and I could just game in peace. No one had to even know where I was or what I was doing. I stopped working. I stopped doing everything. And it was during that time that I kind of realized that what is it about these games? Like I just went from not gaming for 2 years, cold turkey, to gaming 16 hours a day for 5 months straight. There has to be something more than just these games are fun. And that's when I realized that there were specific reasons why I played. And I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again because I think it's so valuable for people. I game for 4 reasons. The first is temporary escape. Games allowed me to escape from stress. The second was social connection. I was gaming with my friends online. The third was measurable progress. It's a lot harder to see that in life. You know, sometimes you're growing and it feels like you're dying. In the game, you know where your progress is because they give you a progress bar or they give you a level up or you get to see your ranking. And then in the fourth reason was purpose, a sense of purpose, a structured sense of purpose, always knowing what to do next. And it was actually those reasons why I played. So I obviously came to a point where I decided to quit once again. But this time I did it with a little bit more awareness of I'm drawn to games for specific reasons. And if I'm going to be able to quit successfully, then I need to find those in new activities. So I started DJing, I started a business, I started surfing, I started traveling. Like I started to do other things to fulfill those needs, go to yoga, go to the gym, go hiking. And that was really successful. But there was another part to it. And the other part is that when I was younger, my parents at one point took the games away from me. And I'll never forget that because I remember playing that last game and I made it last as long as it could. And in that moment, there was some degree of I lost my sense of power or I lost my capacity to control my experience in life. And I was pretty young. And I think that has had a major impact on my behavior throughout my life of, eventually my parents couldn't ground me anymore because I would ground them back. Or, I dropped out of high school and never once considered what anyone else thought because I was making that decision for myself. But when it came to gaming, this last 5 months, at one point, I realized that this was obviously having a pretty significant negative impact. But I allowed myself to game for 5 months in peace, without judgment, to give myself that last hurrah, to allow myself to close that chapter in my life of something that as a kid was very meaningful to me, and to just be able to live it one last time and really enjoy it. And then at the end of that, it was so clear that it was just time. And I also took that step for myself. And I really haven't looked back. Like I haven't played a game in like 7 years or something now. And it just doesn't appeal to me. There's just so many other things I would rather do with my time. But I do think for me personally, being able to really gain the closure on it that I needed was a significant help. And I struggle with how to share that for other people because I think that that's a very easy justification to have. Oh, I'm gaining closure, so I'm going to keep gaming for like the next 5 years versus really being like, you know what, I'm going to be present with this and I'm going to be in touch with these emotions and I'm going to move on.
So when people, there's so many sort of parallels in my own story, because one of the things I've tried to figure out is what was it about the moment that I decided to stop drinking, for example, that allowed me to do that after a million times of not being able to. And I still don't fully understand it. I don't even know if I really ever will. I've analyzed it every which way from Sunday. And I think it was just a confluence of factors, and that happened at the right time in the right place for me to be able to appreciate that I wanted something different in my life. So I always thought, God, if I could just package this up into like some kind of magic bullet, think of how many people I could help. But there's just so many, there's such an infinite number of variables that contribute to, each of our own human experiences, that it's really a challenge to do that. So when people come into your community, I guess, what kind of support do they need? And how much does vulnerability help people in their healing journey?
It's a really good question. I think that, I'll answer it quick. The first is what people need. So what people need is to understand step by step what they need to do to be able to move forward. So step number one is you need to commit to 90 days of not gaming. And the reason has to do with the way your brain interacts with games. So you actually have to reset your brain and its dopamine expectation levels. Think about that like resetting the instant gratification paradigm that you're living in. So number one, commit to 90 days. Number two, understand why you play and find new activities that fulfill the same needs that gaming fulfills for you. Step three, develop more self-awareness. The easiest way to do that is to create more structure in your life. So schedule your day, use an agenda, have activities planned for the weekend before the weekend. Essentially, how can you avoid that feeling of I'm bored, I have nothing better to do, and so, hey, gaming can't be any worse than just sitting around staring at the ceiling. Find some more structure. The fourth is definitely a support community. So the power in that is that by journaling and being a part of the community, you are being vulnerable. And being vulnerable allows yourself to experience a deeper sense of connection in your life, which is part of why you're gaming, but it's also part of what you're avoiding. Because when you're stuck isolated in a dark room gaming, I'm sure there's people in your life who are saying, hey, Johnny, you're playing games a lot. Or like, hey, Johnny, come up for dinner. Or, hey, maybe you should get off the computer. And you're like very aggressive, I imagine, in the way you respond to that. You're almost offended. But that's actually hurting your capacity to connect with people and to connect with yourself. You're just living life on autopilot. So being vulnerable really helps you cultivate a deeper sense of self-esteem and a deeper sense of confidence in yourself because you're a lot more secure in who you are, because you're actually recognizing who you are and the experience you're having in life. And you're saying, look, this is the experience I'm having, and I'm not going to judge myself for it, or I'm even going to share that I'm judging myself for it. And you get that support because you don't have to do it alone. And I think that, every time I've been super vulnerable this year, all I've got in return is a deeper sense of connection with people, which is ultimately what I was desiring anyways. And so, between those 4 steps, committing to 90 days, finding new activities that fulfill the same needs as gaming, creating more self-awareness by using structure, right? What gets measured gets managed. And number 4, finding a support community, whether that's, gamequitters.com, finding the forum, joining Stop Gaming on Reddit, or just creating a small group of friends who you can be open and honest with, or creating agreements with friends where, hey, if I'm going through a tough time, can I give you a call? Can I shoot you a text? Can we talk about it? Cultivating more of that in your life. Maybe it's with an uncle or an adult that you trust, a friend, a teacher. That will help you so much. And it's been one of the biggest game changers in my life as well.
That is great advice, and I love the structured way of laying that out and the steps to follow. So I think that's a great place to leave it. I just ask maybe one final question, if there's anybody out there that is thinking that they might have a problem or knows they have a problem and are not sure what to do or where to turn, what would you recommend for them?
Just to first be kind to themselves. The experience they're having is okay. It's valid. It's something that there's no shame in acknowledging, and it takes an immense amount of courage and bravery, but you're not alone. And currently, especially around gaming, there's thousands and thousands of people all over the world who are sharing a similar experience as you, who would love to also support you with that. So I would just really encourage you to reach out for help. Gamequitters.com. Go check out the YouTube videos. See if it resonates. If it does, we'd love to have you, start a thread in the journal or on the forum, introduce yourself, and we'd love to support you. And if there's somewhere else that you feel more comfortable talking to a counselor or a therapist or joining a 12-step program or whatever it is, find what works for you. But there are people all over the world who get it and who are on your team, and you're not alone. And so reach out for help. It's one of the biggest traits of leadership is being willing to take action and to go first. And so by you reaching out, you're showing immense bravery and leadership in your life, and continuing to do that day after day is going to bring so much value. And the amount of growth that you're able to see is truly remarkable. So just take it one day at a time.
I love it. Well, listen, thanks for being a guest on the show. And thank you so much for the contribution you're making, man. It's, I'm sure you've changed thousands and thousands of people's lives or helped them change their own lives. And that's just one of the greatest gifts, probably the greatest gift one person can give to another. So I'm really glad we had the chance to connect. I'm glad we had the chance I had the chance to learn from you and gain the benefit of your wisdom. And I wish you nothing but the best in the future, brother.
Thanks, Jason, and really grateful for you to create this platform and create this community to bring value to others. It's really incredible, and I know it's making a difference for people. So just want to acknowledge you for that and appreciate you having me on to share my story.
All right. Take care. And there you go. A great conversation on gaming, but much more than that. Gaming addiction, much more than that, though. It was, a lot about personal development and self-awareness and structure and all of these important concepts that apply to everybody's life beyond the world of addiction and gaming. But, I just didn't know much about this, and it was great to talk to Cam. He's obviously a very passionate, articulate guy. He's created some great success for himself and other people in the work that he's doing, and these are the kind of people I love to talk to. I say this all the time, right? But it's like the phoenix from the ashes, people going from as low as you could possibly be to creating a very different world based on their experiences, and Cam is doing exactly that, which is why he is a mental health warrior. Dun, dun, dun. I'm going to end this episode like I end every single episode, and that's by saying, if you have struggled, I want you to know that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I will not fucking judge you. Get it? I won't fucking judge you. Definitely won't judge you. So, but please consider giving somebody else that gift today, okay? Because seriously, we've all struggled, and sometimes it just takes one person going first to make another person feel like they're not alone, okay? And that's a gift you have the power to give, and it won't only change somebody else's life, it'll change yours, because you will realize that you are a super powerful rock star. All right, so have a wonderful day and continue kicking ass, and thank you for listening. And we will see you next time.